Well, have you ever noticed that we date our calendar from the birth of a newborn baby? AD doesn't mean after death, it means Anno Domini, the year of the Lord. And so to this day, we still mark our calendars by the birth of a baby. And his birth is the moment that divides all of history, all of human history. The birth of Jesus shows us that God is real and alive and active in our lives. And it shows us the way in which God works in our lives. Even when he seems distant or silent or far away, or doesn't seem real to us. And that's what I want to talk about in this message. I want to talk about how does God work in our lives. At the very heart and core of the Christmas message is an event that took place in real time with real people in a real place. It is the story of the way that God works in our lives. And I want to look at that story, and to do that, I want to look at a great king, a young father, and a newborn baby. Luke records the story in chapter 2, beginning at verse 1 of the birth of Jesus. He writes, "In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and all went to be registered, each to his own town." The first thing that we see about how God works in our lives is through the life of a great king. God is working, the first principle we see, even when we don't see him working. God is working even when we don't see him working. Notice the details that Luke gives us about the birth of this son in real time, in real history. He says, in those days. Well, what days is he referring to? He's referring to the time when for 500 years Rome was torn between a bitter civil war. There was no peace in the land. And then, on the Ides of March, 44 BC, the emperor Julius Caesar was assassinated by a man by the name of Brutus. Ultimately, a man by the name of Octavian emerged as the leader of the Roman Empire. He took the title Caesar, Lord, Emperor, worthy of praise and honor and worship. And not only that, but he changed his name from Octavian to Augustus, the august one, the strong one. He consolidated the nation, he strengthened the military, he centralized the government, he initiated extraordinary building programs. In fact, he said, "I found Rome in brick and I turned it into marble." His 44-year reign is known as the Pax Romana, the golden age of Rome. And here's the deal. It's the first time in history that the world is united under one person, one government, one law, one language, one currency, under unprecedented power. Then Caesar Augustus does something so extraordinary that Luke tells us it's the first time it ever happened in the history of the known world. Augustus realizes that to fund his ambitious building programs and to pay for his military, in which he uses to control the known world in that day, that he'll have to inaugurate a worldwide registration, a census, for the purpose of taxation. Nothing like it has ever happened before, and nothing like it has ever happened since then. Here's how it works. The plan is amazingly simple. He's going to require every single person to return to the place of their family of origin, to be registered. And it was this decree that brought the whole world into a centralized government under the Roman military. Which is why Paul calls this decree the very epicenter of human history, the very moment that defined all of history. Paul writes these words in Galatians chapter 4, verse 4. "But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons." This is a fantastic verse in Galatians. First, Paul says, when the fullness of time. He's talking about time here. Now, Paul had three words that he could use for that word time. The first was chronos. We get our word chronometer, our watch. It is the moment-by-moment passage of time, the ticking of the clock. In football, it starts with a clock. It ends with a clock. There's a last-second field goal. It is the moment-by-moment measurement of time. But he didn't use the word chronos. He could have used the word kairos, not just the mere passage of time, but a single event in time that's so significant that it marks time. Columbus discovering America. Gutenberg inventing the printing press. The American Revolution. These are what we call moments that change history. But he didn't use that word kairos. He didn't use the word chronos. He used the word pleroma, the fullness of time. That moment in time that defines all of time and all of history. And to Paul, there was only one pleroma. No one knew it at the time, but God was working. God was working when no one knew he was working to bring about the fullness of time through a decree by a great king by the name of Caesar Augustus. God was working when no one saw him working. Luke continues in chapter 2, verse 4. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was the house and the lineage of David. Luke gives us more details. Not a fantasy, not a fairy tale. Real people, real time, real places. God is working through a young father. God is at work in his time and is his way. That is the second principle. God is always at work in his time and his way. This story gets even better. As it turns out, under this decree of Caesar Augustus, one of the people that has to go for this new enrollment is a simple peasant from a sleepy little cattle town in Galilee called Nazareth. His name is Joseph. He had a young bride-to-be by the name of Mary. She was 14 years old or so, scared. First time she's going to have a child. They undertook a rugged, bone-jarring 80-mile journey from Nazareth to Bethlehem during the last days of her pregnancy. No one knows God's working, and no one knows that God's working in his time and in his way. They're just doing what they're told to do. They go to Bethlehem. It was prophesied that the child would be born in Bethlehem, a sleepy backwater shepherd village. This child wasn't born in Rome or Greece or the center of the world, but he was born out there in a very small place. A very great king was coming into this world, and he's born in a very insignificant place. No one saw it, but God is at work in his time and in his way. From his headquarters in Rome, Caesar Augustus has no idea that God is using him to bring about the fullness of time, the pleroma, through a young father from Nazareth, who God is leading to a cattle shelter in Bethlehem. And if that were not enough, he is of the lineage of David. Joseph is from the tribe of Judah. As you'll recall, the patriarchs, we had Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And then there was 12 sons that Jacob had. And one of those was Judah. And it is prophesied that this child would be born of the lineage of the tribe of Judah. Over time, there's a man by the name of Ovid who has a son by the name of Jesse, who has a son by the name of David. And Luke tells us here this newborn baby will come from the lineage of David. And that young man, that father that's journeying now to Bethlehem, he had no idea that in God's time and in God's way, he had been working for over 40 generations from Abraham to Jesus, moving, leading, guiding, and directing in his time and in his way. I know in our lives sometimes we don't see God working, and it's because we want him to work in our time and in our way. But God sometimes may be silent, but he is never still. He is never in a hurry. But for you and me, he is always on time. His time, in His way, and His time. Well, there's a third way that God works in our lives. He works through a great king when no one sees him working. He works through a young father in God's time and in God's way. And he works through a newborn baby. God is working His way when we least expect it. I mean, look at the place of His birth. We would expect God to be born in a palace in Rome, but He wasn't. He wasn't born in a quaint wooden creche that we see on Christmas cards. He wasn't. He was born in an unexpected cattle shelter. In the cold, in the dark, in the damp. It's crowded. It's a lousy place for a baby to be born. It's God's way of saying, I have come in time and in history, in real people, in real lives, in real places to live in your world. Now, I know that Christmas can be a difficult time for us. It can get crowded and confusing in our lives. It can get dirty and smelly. Sometimes we wonder, where is God in all of this in my life? It doesn't seem like He's active. It doesn't seem like He's working in my life. We get desperate. Life gets us on the run. It drives us within an inch of our breaking point. Sometimes we say, I don't know if I can make it one more day. We feel lost. We feel alone. And we know that Christmas is an intensifier of feelings. If you're feeling good, Christmas makes us feel even better. But if we're feeling bad, Christmas just gets worse. I want to assure you that it's in the middle of those kinds of feelings that the Christmas message lights up the night sky. God enters our world, our time, our history, our lives unexpectedly and sends His Son to convince each of us once and for all that we are not alone, that He understands that He is here, He is alive, He is active, and He is real. This newborn baby is God's permanent reminder of the depth and the care and the love of God for you and me this very moment. It is through His life that heaven touches earth, that God touches you and me. And God invites us to be a part of that miracle, of the miracle of the incarnation, that He has come to be seen and known and heard and to be touched. Let's go back to that great passage in Galatians chapter 4, verse 4. I want you to see something that maybe you didn't see the first time around. Paul writes, "But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth His Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons." Paul is saying here that it's the fullness of time for a reason. This is not just a visit from God. God sent forth His Son to redeem us and to adopt us as His children. I have a friend who's adopted, and he told me one time as we were having lunch, he said, I've been adopted twice. First time, my parents came to a foreign land and they chose me and picked me out of an orphanage. And I was so lucky for them to bring me back here to the United States and put me in good schools and a beautiful home and nice clothing. And I went off and graduated from a good college. I'm so thankful that they chose me to give me these wonderful gifts that I didn't expect. And then he said, when I became a believer in Jesus, I realized I was adopted again, that God had chosen me, that He had taken me out of the orphanage of life and invited me to sit at His very family table, that I was a child of God. I am twice adopted. And that's what God is saying here. He is saying, I have come to redeem you, and not only to redeem you, but I am sending my Son to adopt you into my very kingdom. This is the wonder of Christmas. It is God's attempt to tell any and all who will listen that no matter who you are, or where you find yourself at this moment, or what the status of your life, God is alive and active and real and close, even when we can't see Him. even when his time isn't our time, even when we expect him to do things and he does the unexpected. If you ever doubt the love of God and that he is working in our lives and the way that he works in our lives, look at the King and the Father and this newborn Son. And maybe this Christmas, you can open up your heart and say, you mean all of this was for me, just me, that God would have done all of this, of the miracle of Christmas, just for me? Yes, yes, for you and for me. God sent forth his Son in the fullness of time, Anno Domini, in the year of the Lord, for you and for me, so that we could know the wonder of his love. And my prayer for you and me and my family and your family this Christmas season is that it would be a special season, not just a holiday, but a holy day in our lives. That we would know more deeply than ever before the wonder of his love for you and for me.